Shalom, shalom. This video is about John 11 verses 46 to 53, and it's about Joseph Caiaphas' prophetic prayer that God's will to be done, and even though he did not intend to do so. I'll read the text. But some of them, that some of the witnesses of Lazarus' resurrection, went to the Pharisees and told them what Yeshua had done. So the ruling Kohanim and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. What are we doing? They asked. This man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our holy place and our nation. But one of them, Caiaphas, who was Cohen Gadol that year, said to them, "You know nothing. You don't take into account that it's better for you that one man die for the people rather than for the whole nation to be destroyed." Now he did not say this by himself, but as the Cohen Gadol that year, he prophesied that Yeshua would die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but also so that he might gather together into one the scattered children of God. So from that day on they plotted to kill him. There's a bit of a problematic statement there. Twice it says Joseph Caiaphas was the high priest for that year. He actually was the high priest for quite some time, and not only for that year. So I can't explain that, so I'll just ignore it. Why did I say that the 66 high priest Joseph Caiaphas prayed for God's will to be done? Because it was God's will that Yeshua, the suffering servant of Isaiah 53, Messiah, the son of Joseph ben Yosef, must carry away the wages of sin through his death of everyone who believes in him. That is evident from the conclusion of these verses. Caiaphas, however, did not have insight into this due to the two messiahs and the conflicting roles of the son of David versus the son of Joseph, or the suffering servant then versus the king of kings. It escaped him. He was not aware. And the second conclusion is that Yeshua might gather together into one the scattered children of God. And this is a strange, complex statement. At the time, the diaspora was voluntary and for commercial reasons. Israel's first diaspora was to Egypt when Jacob and his family of 70 went there. The forced dispersion to Assyria was about 750 years earlier than Yeshua's time, and the Babylonian diaspora happened more than 600 years before Yeshua's time that we're speaking about. The bloody diaspora driven by the Romans still lay in the future at the time, and that these verses were written. So it's not referred to that as well. There are umpteen biblical prophecies that Yeshua will return his people to the promised land, and he did so after Egypt during the Exodus. He did so again after the Babylonian exile, and the return was led by Nehemiah and Ezra. The return in modern times after the bloody diaspora that the Romans brought about of the Jews, the return of the Jews, and all Israelites became known as Jews actually. That this modern Aliyah, or return to the promised land, has begun in the late 19th century and it continues until today. There's no doubt of Adonai's hand in this, yet the controversy about the current Aliyah or return comes from two sides. One side, certain Orthodox Jews who object that the modern state of Israel was brought about by secular Jews, mostly Russian Jews, and not by their own religious initiatives, and therefore they do not acknowledge Adonai's hand in the re-establishment and growth of the modern state of Israel. And then on the other hand, many spiritual blind Christian churches that do not want to acknowledge Adonai in the Jewish Aliyah because they would expose the folly of their own replacement theology. So they try to ignore the fact, the fulfillment of the valley of dry bones that's coming to life. And the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy of can a nation be born in a day. In fact, the modern Jewish Aliyah has largely been sponsored and financed by Christian churches, different churches to the ones who do not acknowledge that. And it was mostly American churches. And in this, they acted as Yeshua's instrument. They acted as his hands and feet, doing his will. And a little personal story here. My wife, who is a Russian Jew, we met Americans who were actually visiting the Kremlin before the Jews were allowed to return when the wall fell. And they walked like Israel walked around Jericho, walked around the Kremlin walls to pray for the Kremlin walls to fall. And they brought about the Aliyah of, my wife Rita was part of, in 2 batches, but 1.5 million Russian Jews who made Aliyah over a 2-year period. And that their flights did not cost them because it was paid for by these American Christians who understood prophecy very different to the Christian churches that, for instance, that I grew up in, that tried to deny or just shut out the fulfillment of these prophecies. Okay, Joseph Caiaphas hailed from Kirbet Kiefa, a Judean town west of Jerusalem in Judea, remembering that the tribe of Levi were not given their own territory, but they were given cities amongst the territory of the other tribes, and they had no territory of their own. Kiefa was such a Levitical city. Joseph Caiaphas was Annas' son-in-law and considered to be the first of the brothers of the rich man in hell who asked for Lazarus to be returned to life to testify to his 5 brothers. It was 4 blood brothers and 1 brother-in-law. And so like the other brothers, Caiaphas failed to listen to Lazarus' testimony because they, that's the house of Annas, scoffed at the Torah and the prophets. And exactly as Abram told the rich man Eliezer in Sheol, that if they scoff at Torah and prophets, they're not going to listen to Lazarus even if he returned from the dead. And this happened. In this, the house of Annas were just like the modern church, who also discarded the Torah and therefore are blind to prophecy. Caiaphas' prayer was that it is better for you Sanhedrin members, that one man die for the nation rather than for the whole nation to be destroyed. So what was this about? Well, firstly, the politicians in the Sanhedrin exploited the people, and they sucked up to the Romans to maintain their privileged status, to lord over all Israel as far as the Romans would allow them to do. Remember that in their preceding prayer, they feared that if people started to follow and believe in Yeshua, the Romans will be angered. This was because of the popular misconception that Yeshua came as the son of David Messiah to liberate Israel from the Romans. The Romans was bad to the bones, but the Sanhedrin had learned how to become wealthy under this unrighteous system, and they wanted to retain that status quo. And secondly, therefore, instead of the popular rebellion that they feared under Yeshua's leadership, Joseph Caiaphas proposed to assassinate the leader. He proposed to murder Yeshua, to safeguard not only their own prosperity but also the nation. This was his plot against Yeshua. Now, if we take all of this and apply it to our own lives, we can say, different to the case of the house of Annas, we have to diligently search for God's will in the scriptures and in prayer with open hearts and open minds. And the Torah, followed by the prophets, is the very best place to start. And with that, I bid you shalom, shalom. Enjoy your search.